Hello everyone and welcome back to the Vegan Proteins YouTube channel. My name is Coach Ben and today I'm going to be talking to you about weight loss plateaus. So I think this is an area that a lot of folks who are hoping to lose some fat, lose some weight, I think those two bear worth talking about, the difference between the two of those things and why you may want to focus on fat loss as opposed to weight loss. People tend to struggle with feeling like they are stuck and they don't know where to go from there. So the topic of today's video is going to walk you through how to assess if you are actually plateaued, if you're stalled out on your weight loss or fat loss journey. I'm going to talk about the nutrition side of things. I'm going to talk about the calorie expenditure side of things, and then how to make a change if you are in a spot where you don't know where to go and you feel like you are stuck. And at the end of this video, if you're still feeling lost, I'll provide you with some resources so that you may continue to further your education and get past those roadblocks. So the first thing that I want to do is talk about the difference between weight loss and fat loss. And weight loss may mean that you are on the scale decreasing your body weight. However, that might result in you just being a smaller version of yourself if you do things that result in muscle loss, lean tissue loss, and that's not what we want, right? The whole point of weight loss usually is for us to improve our body composition, and that usually means putting on some muscle or at least maintaining the muscle that we have and losing body fat, and that improves our visual appearance. So what we're really after when we think we're after weight loss is that we are after fat loss. So generally, if we want to be losing body fat and not just weight in general, we want to shoot for a reasonable rate of weight loss. And to give a broad guideline, that would be maybe between 0.5% to 1% of your body weight each week, maybe somewhere between 0.5 pound to 2 pounds at the higher end if you're a heavier individual of fat loss every single week, which equates anywhere from 250 calorie deficit per week up to 1,000 calorie deficit per week, based on those numbers that I kind of just rattled off. Engaging in some sort of resistance training is a good idea. You could start with 2 or 3 times a week for a 30 to 45 minutes full body training program where you're training all your major muscle groups, variety of movement patterns, a push, a pull in the horizontal and vertical planes, a hip hinge, and a squat pattern, and then any kind of isolation exercises to fill in the gaps. So basics of fat loss and of weight loss. So once we determine kind of our ideal rate of weight loss, then it comes to the point where we might feel like we hit a little bit of a snag, we hit a little bit of a plateau. Now, I first want to define what I am looking at when I assess a plateau. So that would be probably 3 to 4 weeks in a row. So not just I had a couple days where I weighed the same thing on the scale, because the scale can fluctuate based on stress. It can fluctuate based on our fluid intake, the food we ate the previous day, how much fiber. So many things can influence our scale weight acutely. So we're looking at trends over time. I would recommend taking your body weight every day or as often as you can. If you can do that every day, great. If that's psychologically not something that you're ready to deal with, can you do 3 times a week? Even if it's once a week, you can make do with that. However, I think that getting it every single day and then taking a weekly average probably provides us with the most accurate look at what is really happening. So once you do that, if you have 3 or 4 weeks of basically nothing is happening much on the scale, and ideally you would be taking some tape measurements, so different site measurements, including your legs, your arms, your waist. Waist is probably the one that will show the most acute measurements, and the measurements generally will be going down, and taking photos. And I would say if you haven't had any changes in your measurements, you haven't had any changes in the photos visually, and your body weight is staying the same for 3 to 4 weeks, okay, we're probably looking at a bit of a plateau. Anything outside of that, so if your weight has stayed pretty similar for 3 or 4 weeks, but let's say that you're noticing some difference in your photos or your waist measurement is going down, that's a good sign. And you might not be losing weight because you might be gaining muscle alongside of that, and that's a really good thing. So much of the time we think that we're plateaued and we haven't made any progress because our body weight is staying the same. But if you were to put up photos, especially over 3 or 6 month time frames, and you've been getting stronger in the gym and maybe your waist measurement is going down, almost very likely you are undergoing some degree of body recomposition, which is what we want, right? We're after physique change and not just seeing a smaller number on the scale. So let's say that you have determined that you are in fact plateaued. Now, there's two sides of the equation when it comes to fat loss. There are the calories in and there are the calories out. So calories in is the food that we're eating, and calories out would be the food that we are excreting. But then of course, things like how many calories our body is burning at rest and with all the activity that we're doing each day. And there's a variety of factors that influence all of these things. So on the calories in side of the equation, we can look at things like your current protocol. So what have you been doing? Have you been following anything in particular? Have you kind of just been eating whatever or trying to eat healthy? Sometimes people feel like the changes that they are making are really drastic, yet they're not seeing any sort of results. So the thing that I would first look at is, okay, what have you been doing recently? Maybe you've been doing intermittent fasting, so you've been kind of shrinking down the time that you're eating every single day. Maybe you've been doing a ketogenic diet, or maybe you've been doing whole foods only. Something that is rule-based and eliminates a certain group of foods. That can work for weight loss or for fat loss, because at the end of the day, all you need is a calorie deficit in order to achieve that fat loss. However, I think the most objective way to do things is to implement some form of calorie tracking. It doesn't have to be extreme over the long term, but it can be something that you do for a couple weeks or a couple months to learn the skill, and then you learn a lot from that experience. If you have not watched one of the more recent Muscles by Brussels podcast episodes that Danny and I did all about tracking, that would be a very helpful episode to check out regarding this idea. And I think just tracking variables in general can be super helpful for determining if you need to make adjustments to whatever you're doing if you're not getting the results that you want to be getting. So what this will do, specifically if you're weighing things out on a scale, or maybe you're even just kind of eyeballing things and writing things down, if whatever you're currently doing is not working, you probably need to implement a greater degree of accuracy in terms of how you track or measure variables, because you might be able to lose those first 5 or 10 pounds just by cutting out soda and generally trying to eat more whole foods. That might work for a period of time. And then you might need to tighten things up as you find that your margin for error is decreasing the more weight that you lose. That's pretty common. So you might get to a point where, hey, I pretty much need to be taking the food scale and measuring and weighing out all the food that I'm eating, inputting that into my tracking app, and making sure that everything that I'm doing on a daily basis, for the most part, is through that method. Now, of course, that isn't to say that you can't have a meal out and eyeball and kind of guesstimate, but the more frequently that you're doing that, the less confident you can be that you are actually hitting those goals. For example, if people are offering you these BLTs, what I like to call bites, licks, and tastes, then you are then not accounting for that in your tracking. Maybe you're cooking with some oil, or you're adding, small amounts of condiments and spices to your meal. Unless you're in a prep setting, that's probably not going to add up to a ton, especially things like spices. But if you're adding condiments that have a lot of fat or just a lot of calories in general, and you're not accounting for those, think about something like a salad dressing or some mayo. You might seem like, oh, I'm only putting a little bit, or some vegan butter. But if you're not tracking that, then those little things throughout the day can add up to hundreds of calories. And I've seen it before where people are like, oh, I'm eating 1,000 calories or 1,200 calories, but then I actually have them track literally every single thing they put into their mouth, and they realize they've been eating 1,800 or 2,000 calories. So I think that's a really surefire way of knowing that what you are doing is exactly what you actually say that you're doing. So that is on the tracking side of things. On the calories out side of the equation, that is when you are thinking about things like cardio or steps, which are often a proxy for cardio. So let's say that you have started by doing 30 minutes of cardio 3 times a week, but you aren't tracking any sort of expenditure that you're doing outside of that. You may notice, especially if you try to increase this, so let's say you're stalled out, you decide, I don't want to make any changes to my nutrition, but I can do some more cardio, I have some more time. So you go from doing 3 times a week at 30 minutes to 5 times a week at 45 minutes. You may find that the rest of the day now you're really tired, you're laying around, you don't feel like getting up off the couch. That is kind of a way that our body has an inbuilt mechanism of when we try to increase a lot of the activity that we're doing, our body finds ways of compensating. So that's often why I'll use something like step counts as a way to quantify just the general amount of activity that we are doing throughout our day. And I think it also kind of makes it into a little bit of a game. So everything counts towards that step count goal. If you take your dog for a walk, if you go grocery shopping, if you're playing with your kids, whatever it is that involves some degree of activity, it's going to count towards that expenditure goal. And oftentimes going out for a walk, listening to some music or a podcast in nature, it's a really enjoyable way, and it kind of gets away from this exercise is a punishment or exercise is something that's unenjoyable. It's something that often can be really seamless. If you work a stationary job, you can get one of those under desk treadmills, often called walking pads, and you can kind of slowly walk on that as you answer emails or you listen in on a meeting. That can be a really great way to kind of get your expenditure in throughout the day. So some combination of intentional cardio plus a step count plus then any kind of other activity, the resistance training that you're doing throughout the day, that constitutes your energy out. And let's say that you determine that you are plateaued. Usually I would make a change to nutrition, or I would make a change to somebody's expenditure, or some smaller combination of the two of those. And usually it depends on the person. So if there's somebody who's really crunched for time, I might not have them increase their expenditure unless they're already doing something like a walking pad, and that just requires them to devote a little bit more of their day on that walking pad as opposed to sat behind the desk, and it doesn't require any more time component, just a little bit more energy. However, there might be somebody who doesn't do that and they're already pretty tight on their schedule, but they don't mind eating a little bit less, or that's just the best option for them. Sometimes if you're really busy, that can actually help because you're taking your mind off of food. So let's say you decide to take a couple hundred calories out of your plan, you barely notice it. That's a case that can definitely happen. So I would say if you do find that you're plateaued, evaluate what would you prefer. Would I prefer to do a little bit more activity? Would I prefer to eat a little bit less, or a little combination of the two of them? Let's say that right now you're eating 2,000 calories and you're walking about 10,000 steps a day. I would say, depending on the rate of progress you've been making, let's say that you're just kind of plateaued and you haven't been making any progress. It'll be individual dependent, but I would say making a change that adds an extra 250 to 500 calories of energy expenditure, or taking that away from food, creating a 250 to 500 calorie deficit if you truly are stalled out, is probably where I would start out. If you're a smaller individual, maybe a smaller female, I would start on the lower side of that, closer to the 250 range. Whereas if maybe you are a heavier male, I would start probably closer to that 500 range. So in general, 500 calorie deficit a week, 1 pound of fat loss, half a pound then would be that 250 calorie deficit per week. So going back to that example of 10,000 steps and 2,000 calories, you could maybe decide to go down to 1,700 calories, and maybe you add 1,000 steps or 2,000 steps. You could go from 10 up to like 12 or up to 15 maybe, if that's something that you want to do. I probably wouldn't go much above 15,000 steps, and I don't have necessarily a hard cutoff for calories, but I would say if you've been chronically dieting for a long period of time and you're down to 1,200, 1,000 calories and you're really just struggling, that's probably a time where you want to take a maintenance period or a diet break. So if you've been doing a fat loss phase for 8, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, or anything longer than that after you're plateaued, it might be a good idea, instead of trying to further kind of push your calories down or push your expenditure up, you're going to find that there's a limit when it comes to both of those things with expenditure and food. And you might get to a point where you're plateaued and you're doing the most activity you feel like you can do and you're eating the least that you feel like you can adhere to. And that is really what's going to matter the most at the end of the day, is your adherence and your ability to stick to that. And you might need to take a break. So that might mean that for a period of time, you're decreasing the amount of activity you're doing, you're eating a little bit more food. It's going to give you the psychological break. It's going to give you a break from just kind of the stress of dieting. It's an inherent stress on our bodies. And I would say usually doing that for at least 4 weeks, sometimes 2-3 months, or even longer, until you feel like you're ready to go again. And one thing that's really nice about these maintenance phases is that you can build up your calories, decrease your expenditure, and you give yourself a runway that you can then make further changes. Because if you run out of runway, you can't keep decreasing food or increasing activity forever. So I would say if you find yourself stuck, you feel like you have nowhere else to go, take a maintenance phase and try to maintain your current body weight within a couple pounds. It can fluctuate down or up a little bit. That's totally fine. Let's say a band of like 4 to 6 pounds that you might fluctuate between. Again, kind of scales depending on how large of a human being you are. And getting to a point where psychologically you feel like you are ready to diet or ready to go again. And you're in a place where you have calories that you can pull down and you have room to go up with your expenditure. So that would be what I would be looking at if you feel like you're plateaued, but you just have nowhere to go from there. And I would say those are the basics of weight loss plateaus, fat loss plateaus, and how to break through them. If you have any questions and anything came up for you, please feel free to put them down in the comment section below, and I will look at them, or someone else from Vegan Proteins will get back to you ASAP. If you've tried some of these tips, or you're still a little bit confused or overwhelmed and you're looking for some guidance on your journey, that's what we do here at Vegan Proteins Online Coaching. We work with clients one-on-one and help them achieve their goals, break through plateaus, and get in the best shape of their lives. So if you're interested in that, you can check the link down in the description below. You can head over to veganproteins.com, click on the application link and fill that out, and we will get back to you ASAP. Thank you so much for tuning into another video. If you want to see more like this, you can hit the subscription button, leave a like, and share this with anyone that you think would benefit from this information. We greatly appreciate it, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks.